Okay, so I know that this topic of that we're about to discuss, hopefully for the next few weeks, it was on some of your minds. So I decided let's dive right into it. So the topic we're going to be discussing is basically the relationship between bitachon and ishtadlos. Bitachon means trust. We all know that there's a very strong relationship between emunah and bitachon. Emunah, just to get the terminology down, emunah means faith. Emunah means believing in what a Jew is supposed to believe in abstractly. Bitachon means taking that faith and actually living with it. Day to day, when difficulties confront the person, to actually draw from the strength of one's faith and to have trust in Hashem in practical terms. So the question that we're going to be discussing, first of all, before we even get to the bigger topic of how much hishtadlus, how much effort is a person supposed to put in life when it comes to making a parnasa or any other endeavor in physical matters. The question we're going to be discussing first of all is what exactly does bitachon mean? What does trust mean? An example, there's been different tzaddikim throughout history that have pioneered different philosophies when it comes to trusting Hashem. What does that mean practically? For example, if I'm crossing a street, is there a concept that I believe I'm not going to get hit by a car? Is there such a thing? Or is there no? There's no such thing as having such trust. I believe that everything is going to be okay. For example, the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zatzal was, amongst the things that he would often tell people was, Shrach gut, then sein good. If you think good, it will be good. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, and this was not something that was just with Lubavitcher Rebbe. Generally speaking, by the Sfarim, by Chassidus, we definitely find such an approach. There is such a concept that a person thinking positively, a person crossing the street and believing that he will not be hit by a car will actually enable him, protect him from getting hit by a car. So on one hand, you have one camp of tzaddikim that definitely pushed this idea of trust, of bitachon, meaning actually believing that everything is going to be good. And somehow, as we'll talk about what this means, somehow that itself affecting the outcome of reality. On the other hand, there's a famous story they say from the Brisker Rav, Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, that during the War of Independence in Israel, so he was in Yerushalayim, and rumors started to spread as the war broke out that he was planning on leaving Yerushalayim to go to a safer area. So the story goes, Rav Yitzchak Goren went over to him and told him that there's no reason for the Rav to worry because we have a tradition that this last Yishuv, this last development of Eretz Yisrael will not be destroyed. So the Brisker Rav told him, that's very nice, you have your tradition. I have a tradition from my father that when they shoot, you run. That's my tradition. In other words, what the Brisker Rav was telling him was the following, that it's true that collectively, maybe it's true that this last Yishuv of Eretz Yisrael, this last settlement won't be destroyed, but as far as me, in my personal individual life, I can't trust that everything's going to be okay. I can't trust that I'm not going to get shot. And therefore, I have to take the proper precautions to avoid getting shot. And when they shoot, you run. So in other words, we have these two different approaches. And what does this faith mean? What does trust mean? Does trust mean a person believing that everything is going to be okay? He's not going to have a difficult issue with this particular area. Or, no, you never know. And then so what exactly does bitachon mean? So to explain this a little bit, again, just to clarify, this guy just gave two tzaddikim that were proponents of each side, but this is an old debate, and as we'll see, they're both camps are definitely right. This is an old issue of what bitachon means. It goes back to times of Rishonim and so on. Generally speaking, as I said, by the Svar and by Chassidus, it's been the promoted, or the bitachon has been talked about in such a way, more like the Lubavitcher Rebbe said it, that if you think good, it will be good, as opposed to other Svarim that are not from the Baal Shem Tov and so on. They have been more proponents of the other approach, that you can't be sure, you have to take all the proper precautions in life, and we'll see in that camp what does bitachon mean. So that's just the beginning of what we're going to be discussing. So to begin this Indian, I want to begin with a pasuk. The pasuk says in Tehillim, Ki shemesh u'mogen Hashem Elokem. Ki shemesh u'mogen Hashem Elokem. So on the simple translation of that pasuk is, Ki shemesh u'mogen Hashem Elokem, the Hashem, our God, is compared to the sun and to a shield. Just like a sun gives life, so Hashem gives life. Just like a shield protects, so Hashem protects. That's a simple translation of the pasuk. Very, very nice. Now there's a teaching from the Baal Tanya. Baal Tanya is famous for writing Sefer Tanya, but the truth is, what's printed, the Sefer Tanya that's printed has a few svarim in it. In the back, after the Sefer Tanya itself, there's a small, little essay. It's not so little, but an essay that the Baal Tanya wrote called Shahar Yichud V'Amunah, the gate of unification and of faith. So over there, the Baal Tanya discusses this pasuk, Yishemesh u'magen Hashem Elokim. And the Baal Tanya explains that the deeper meaning of that pasuk is as follows: that we know, according to Chazal, whatever this means, how it works scientifically, I'm not sure, but Chazal do tell us that the sun that we have in the sky actually has a magen, has a shield. And we know Chazal tell us that if it wasn't for the fact that the sun's light and its brilliance was held back and hidden by this shield, the world wouldn't be able to tolerate its brilliance. And the Gemara, in fact, tells us, it's a famous Chazal, that the third day of Avram Avinu after his bris milah, and the pasuk says Kichom Hayom, that it was a very, very hot day. So Chazal, in fact, tell us that the reason why it was exceedingly hot, which again Hashem did that in order to avoid Avram Avinu having to deal with guests, was because Hashem, on some level, took the sun out of its sheath. Kishemesh u'magen. So the sun, Chazal explained again, so the sun is unbelievably brilliant, but in order for us to receive its brilliance, it has to be hidden to a certain degree by its sheath. Says the Baal Tanya, Kishemesh u'magen Hashem Elokim, means that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem, and the name Elokim correspond to the sun and its sheath. In other words, the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei equals or parallels is related to the concept of the sun, and the name Elokim equals, parallels, and is related to the concept of the sun's sheath. Now, what does that mean? So Baal Tanya goes on to explain that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which what divine names mean in general, that's really its own discussion. We should have a series on that. Hopefully, that's Hashem one day. But just very, very simply, Baal Tanya explains that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, as we all know, is the translate. It's hard to know what exactly the translation is, but the meaning that is taught to us in the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is that Hashem is Haya, Hova V'Hi. Hashem was, is, and will be. Hashem is way beyond our understanding. That's one aspect of what Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means. Another aspect of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means is Havaya, which is that Hashem, that unknowable being that's above time and space, that's unfathomable, He Himself is infusing into reality constantly life. And if it wasn't for His light giving, and if it wasn't for His ability, for His desire and His will to infuse within every single atom and every single molecule of this world with life and His light, it would cease to exist. In other words, the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means that this world that we see is really nothing but godliness, is nothing but Hashem's light manifesting itself in physical things. That's what the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means. So says the Baal Tanya, at the same time that that's true, that there's a level of reality, the depth of reality is that everything that we see with our eyes is nothing but a manifestation of God's light, and everything is nothing but the infinite light of Hashem enclosed in physicality. Nevertheless, says the Baal Tanya, there's a sheath to that reality. Hashem covered that aspect of reality in a garment or in a protective, in a cover, in a case that's called Elokim. What does Elokim mean? So we know that Elokim equals numerically the word Hateva, which means nature. In other words, it's true that when a person digs deep enough into reality, you come in contact with the divine light of Hashem, and nothing that happens, nothing that exists, is empty of Hashem. Molei kol haaretz kavodo, the whole world is full of His presence. Hashem surrounds and fills all of reality. On the other hand, explains the Baal Tanya, if that level of reality, if that truth of reality were to be revealed, that would take away free will. It would take away our ability to feel independent, our ability to accomplish. We would be overwhelmed by that experience. So that sun, that brilliant light of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, of Hashem's light penetrating and manifesting itself in all physicality, has to be enclosed and covered in the name Elokim, which means nature, which means the world that we see with rules, gravity, the world that we see, which is governed by certain set rules, and the world that we see is one that seems independent, that seems to function on its own, that's not just an extended hand of Hashem. So says the pasuk, according to the Baal Tanya, Ki Shemesh u'Magin Havaya Elokim means that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and Hashem and Elokim are telling us that there are two different layers to reality. There are two different layers to reality. And by the way, I'm seeing a question over here. The name Elokim. The name Elokim means judgment, but Elokim means judgment in the plural, right? Elokim is a plural word. That means that everything that we see in this world is not, the word Elokim means that we don't see it as one big holistic light that's emanating from Hashem. We see a lot of distinct points, with each one with a different rule, governed by different rules. That's the name Elokim. So in other words, Kishemesh Amagin Hashem Elokim means that Hashem created the world in such a way where there's two levels to reality, and each one, there's truth to each one. On one aspect, reality exists on the level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which means that everything is God, everything is just a manifestation of Hashem's light, and there is no difference between Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and gravity. There's no such thing as rules, there's no such thing as rules being broken. It's all God. That's the level of Yud Kei Vav Kei. But there's a secondary level which is called the covering of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Ein Elokim, which means nature, which means rules. That's the world that we see, which is governed by rules. Now, it's in this that bitachon and how a person relates to Hashem comes in focus. What does bitachon mean? So the answer is, it depends what level of reality you're living on. Despite that, now listen, the core of reality, the inner workings of reality is Yud Kei Vav Kei. The outer workings of reality, the sheath of this world, the cover of this world is Elokim, Hateva, nature. And Hashem put us in such a world where initially a person's born and raised and gets accustomed to seeing the world with his physical eyes. All that we see in the world that we interact with is the world of Elokim, the world of nature. Hashem, the job of a Jew, what Emunah means, what does faith mean? Emunah means a Jew believing that the world that we see, despite the fact that all we can see is Elokim, to believe that two things. First of all, that the world of nature is itself controlled by Hashem, that it's Elokim. That's already a madrega, right? Many people live a life and just see nature. They don't see that there's a God controlling it. So first of all, the first level of faith, the first level of Avodas Hashem, and this is going to be the beginning of understanding what trust means. The first level of Avodas Hashem is to be born into this world, and to first of all believe that the rules that we see are at least created and by God and is being watched by God. That's number one. To believe that Elokim, that Hateva, that nature is from Elokim. That's already a big madrigan. There's millions of people out there that don't believe that. That they believe the world they see is all that there is, and it's created. It's not created by God. It's not watched by God. It's not, and God has no impact and no involvement in the world of nature. That's the basic foundation of faith of a Jew is to believe that nature comes from Elokim. The next step in Emunah, the greater level of Emunah, is to be able to dig beyond Elokim and to actually come in contact with that level of reality which is called Yud Kei Vav Kei, which means not just to believe that the rules of nature were created by God and God is watching us while we're in the arena of nature. It's deeper than that. Emunah means that the belief of the Jewish people is that that Elokim itself, that nature itself, and that whole arena that is being watched by God and was created by God is itself just a cover for something deeper. And that deeper reality is Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is that there's nothing but the light of Hashem that's infused in all reality. And in truth, nature itself is nothing but a disguise for godliness. And nature itself is nothing but a game. It's nothing but a mask that's hiding the truth of reality, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei. This is the progression of what a Jew needs to be to become a mammon, to become someone who truly believes. Again, even the beginning of belief is an unbelievable level. But this is what Emunah means. Again, just to clarify, stage number one in Emunah is to believe in Elokim, is to believe that nature comes from God. And that's an unbelievable level, and that gives a person unbelievable strength to survive. But that's somewhat of a small level of Emunah compared to what a Jew can reach. The next step, number two in Emunah, is to believe that nature itself, which is created by God, which does exist, which is real, is itself nothing but a covering over a deeper level of existence, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, this is where the divide between the average Jew and a tzaddik lies. The average Jew who's a mammon, who believes in God, who believes in Torah mitzvahs, is probably, for the most part, on level working and on level number one. He's not trying to see beyond nature. He's not trying to penetrate the depth of reality. He's dealing with the world that he sees, the world of Teva, and he's struggling with believing that the world of Teva comes from Elokim. That's an unbelievable thing. A true tzaddik, however, what makes that quantum leap from just regular Jew to tzaddik is that the tzaddik sees beyond nature and lives on a completely different level. When he looks at reality, he doesn't see a world of rules. He doesn't see a world of Elokim. He sees a world of Wtntu. Now that's, again, like I said, it's easy to say these words, but that's an unbelievable level. It's in here, depending on where you're living. Are you living in the first stage of Emunah, of Elokim, or are you living in the second stage of Emunah, of Wtntu? That's determining what your level of bitachon should be. To explain, I mentioned before that there is a contrast in camps. There's one camp that bitachon trust means that if I walk across the street, I'm not going to get hit by a car. On the other hand, no, I could get hit by a car. That's ridiculous. Who knows what's going to be? They're both true, and they're both speaking to different levels of people. For the average person, and this is what we're going to be discussing right now, over the next 2 weeks we'll talk about this more in depth. For the average person who's struggling already with faith number one, with believing in Elokim, believing that the world of nature is itself created and governed by Hashem, then to the extent that that's where he's holding in his faith, then to a certain extent he's governed by those rules. And because he's governed by those, there's no question that Hashem is watching him, and those rules were created by God. But because he believes in those rules, and he's living with eyes that see those rules, and is afraid of those rules, he's governed to a certain extent by those rules. And therefore, for him to walk across the street and to close his eyes and to say, there is nothing but God, it's all God, and if God wanted me to die, I'm going to die anyway, that's completely a mistake. Because if that Jew is living in the level of Elokim, then he has to function with the rules of nature. So what does bitachon mean for such a Jew? Bitachon for such a Jew means, and this is what it's for most of us, is that it's true I might get hit by a car, chas v'shalom, and I have to take all the proper precautions to avoid such a scenario. But if it does happen, it's because that does not mean that Hashem has abandoned me. It does not mean that that event in my life is a vacuum that's just nature itself. It's Elokim. Hashem was watching, and Hashem somehow allowed this to happen, and Hashem used the rules of nature to make this happen. Will it happen? I don't know. It might. Things might happen. I might lose my parnasa. A person might get sick. Chas v'shalom. These things happen, and if you're living in the world of Elokim, you will have to take the proper precautions to avoid it. If they shoot, you run. However, if the person does get shot, he has bitachon to trust that it was coming, that Hashem decreed that to happen, and it was for a reason. And it's ultimately for his own good. That's what bitachon means for the first level Jew. Okay, so I want to make that clear. Now, what does bitachon mean for the next level, for a tzaddik and so on, and how does a person, and is there such a concept for a person that's generally speaking on the first level to tap himself into the second level on occasion? That we're going to see hopefully next week. We'll talk about this in the future weeks. I just want to clarify this point. It's very, very important that for the average person who's working on the first level of faith, of just believing that the world that we see is created and controlled and God is by God, and God is watching over us, to such a person, bitachon means not that everything is going to be okay, but bitachon means that everything that does happen is happening for a reason. But that doesn't mean I don't listen, I don't play the game of the rules, and it doesn't mean that I just walk across the street without looking both ways. That's what bitachon means. I do all this Shabbos I have to do because I am in the world of Elokim. I'm in that world of Teva. I just believe that world of Teva is coming from Elokim. Okay, so we'll make that point very clear what bitachon means. And again, over the next weeks, we'll develop this much deeper and so on, and talk about higher levels of bitachon and how a person works on ascending from this lower level of Emunah to a higher level of Emunah. If there's any questions, I guess we can open up for questions.
I'm sorry, I just unmuted everybody. If anybody has any questions, go ahead. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. This will take a couple of weeks to develop, but if anybody has any specific questions on today's share, please go ahead. Okay, no questions?
Okay.
Okay, shkoyach, Yossi.
Very good. Very good. Okay. See you guys next week.